What if the woman you dismissed was the one with the power to rewrite your future? On a routine flight from Miami to San Francisco, a black woman is quietly reassigned from her rightful first-class seat. No warning, no explanation, just gone. To some, it's a simple oversight. To her, it's a pattern one she's seen too many times. But here's the twist. She isn't just any passenger. She's a federal civil rights auditor flying under the radar. When an elderly woman collapses midair and the crew scrambles to respond, this passenger steps in, calm, capable, watching, documenting. What follows is a cascade of reckonings exposing bias, power, silence, and the invisible weight carried by so many for far too long. What did the airline try to cover up? Who knew and stayed quiet? And how did one woman's quiet resolve start an unstoppable chain of change at 35,000 feet? Get ready for a story of justice at cruising altitude. Like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. Now, let's board Flight 243. A faint hum of fluorescent lights mingled with the steady clatter of rolling suitcases as passengers funneled through the wide glass doors of Miami International Airport. The morning air was warm and heavy with promise, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of unease that only certain travelers could feel. Naomi Reed emerged from the escalator, her navy pantsuit tailored to perfection, her posture betraying none of the nerves stirring inside her chest. In her hand, a crisp boarding pass for first-class seat. 2A gleamed dully beneath the terminal lights. Around her, bodies jostled, voices rose in clipped greetings or hurried goodbyes, and the scent of roasted coffee beans drifted from a nearby cafe cart. She paused a moment, allowing her senses to register the scene. The wide hallway of Gate B12 was crowded but orderly. A dozen different uniforms bustled, each employee with a distinct purpose, uniformed TSA agents guiding families to security. Airline staff in branded polos coordinating luggage carts, and the gate agents, those silent arbiters of who belonged where, standing behind their podiums like judges. Naomi tucked a stray lock of ebony hair behind her ear and tightened her grip on her carry-on. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, though nothing could entirely prepare her for the charged atmosphere of prejudice she sought to document. The gate agent for this flight, a woman with sharp cheekbones and hair slicked into a tight bun, stood behind the scanner. As Naomi approached, the agent's eyes flickered up from the screen. A moment later, they settled on her face and held her in a gaze longer than necessary. Naomi met the stare evenly, but made a mental note. Emily Carter, gate agent. Not that the name mattered much yet, but in Naomi's line of work, every detail would eventually form part of a larger mosaic. Without overt hostility, Emily's expression conveyed something Naomi had learned to recognize well. Doubt that she had the right to be in this cabin. The scanner beeped and flashed OK, yet the hesitation lingered like a shadow. Another passenger, an impeccably dressed white businessman carrying a leather briefcase, slipped quietly up behind Naomi. He offered a quick nod and placed his pass against the reader. The scanner chimed, and he was welcomed aboard with a bright smile and a "have a pleasant flight." "Sir," no pause, no extra scrutiny. Naomi allowed the contrast to register, pulling her own boarding pass from its protective sleeve and raising it again. "2A, first class," she said calmly. Her voice was soft but carried a quiet authority. On any ordinary day, this exchange would have passed in a casual breeze. Today, it felt like a crucible. Emily's lips curved into a practiced customer service smile. But her eyes stayed cool. She typed something on her keyboard, then tapped at the boarding pass again. Naomi held her posture steady, though the knot in her stomach tightened. Microaggressions like this were the opening salvo of deeper wrongs, and Naomi was here to measure every fabric of bias woven into the airline's processes. She slipped her identification from an inside pocket agency badge hidden beneath layers of cover and let it rest in her palm, ready but undisplayed. A second agent drifted into view, whispering something to Emily before slipping back behind the counter. Naomi's pulse remained calm, silent, almost imperceptible. She had trained herself to override the instinctual clench of anger and anxiety. Her mission demanded composure above all. Still, each delayed glance and every screened pass bookended by unspoken skepticism stung like frostbite. Clear boarding wouldn't start for another 20 minutes. But Naomi had arrived early to capture the prelude to boarding. From here, she would observe who moved forward with ease, who was made to linger, and what excuses might be manufactured to bar certain travelers from their rightful seats. The boarding area thrummed with quiet chatter. A pair of children tugged at their mother's sleeve while she juggled two backpacks. A group of mid-20s professionals hunched over laptops, fingers tap-tapping in perfect synchronization. And in that mosaic, Naomi stood apart, a single figure of deliberate calm, surveying a sea of unknowing faces. Time moved in measured increments until finally, the overhead speaker crackled. Passengers with priority boarding, zones 1 and 2, please prepare to board American Flight 243 to San Francisco. The gate area shifted. A thin line of passengers rose, smartphones and purses in hand. Naomi took a steadying breath and rose from her place. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor, a metronome marking each careful step forward. She approached the boarding ramp, ticket and ID presented without hesitation. Emily's welcoming smile flickered off as she scanned the pass once more. Naomi noticed the small crease at the corner of the agent's mouth, an almost imperceptible sign of tension. "Ma'am," Emily said, voice polite but clipped. "Please step aside while I verify your boarding information." Naomi inclined her head. "Certainly," she replied, her tone steady and measured. She stepped sideways, behind a stanchion, as other first-class passengers streamed past a businessman in a tailored suit, a young couple holding matching champagne flutes, an elderly woman with a silk scarf draped elegantly over her shoulders, all processed quickly. Naomi's carry-on slid through the scanner with a mechanical whir, another confirmation that she had followed every rule. Yet, here she waited unwelcomed aboard, even with every document in order. She pulled her notes from her tablet and jotted down Gate B12, 817A, First Class Denial, Agent Emily Carter. The names, times, and emotions would be essential when reconstructing the narrative for FAA enforcement. Around her, the bright morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the shell-white walls. A hush of curiosity rippled through the queue. Some onlookers paused mid-step to watch. A faint sense of triumph curled at Naomi's lips. This was exactly the moment she needed. The quiet injustice of it all would speak volumes. She folded her hands and waited, each second amplifying the tension, until finally Emily cleared her throat and nodded. "Your seat is confirmed. You may board now." Naomi lifted her chin and allowed a slow, graceful step onto the jet bridge. The moment she passed beneath the threshold, she had what she came for: proof that bias could masquerade as routine procedure. cloaked in polite professionalism. Now, the real work would begin. The interior of the jet bridge smelled faintly of metal and machine oil. Naomi stepped through with a silent exhale, passing by a young crew member who greeted her with a quick nod. She returned the gesture without breaking stride. Once inside the aircraft, she was met by the distinct chill of recycled cabin air. The first-class section opened up to her left, a stretch of 8 seats designed for space, comfort, and quiet exclusivity. Her eyes landed on seat 2A, positioned by the window, as specified on her boarding pass. She placed her carry-on gently in the overhead bin, then lowered herself into the leather seat. The cushions were cool and firm, the armrest wide enough for 2 phones and a coffee cup. A subtle sigh left her lips. Despite the tension moments earlier, she had made it to the seat she paid for now. Naomi didn't relax. Instead, she pulled her tablet from her bag and tapped open a folder labeled Case 17 Observational Entry. Her fingers hovered above the screen. The mission wasn't just about what had already happened at the gate. That was only the prelude. Her role was to monitor everything crew interactions, medical protocol, service disparities, and above all, the subtle ways in which unconscious bias changed the quality of care a person received. She minimized the screen and stared out the window for a moment. The tarmac outside shimmered in the late morning sun. Fuel trucks buzzed around the plane like insects. Baggage handlers lifted and secured suitcases below. She spotted a toddler pressing his face against the glass in the next terminal. The scene was mundane, almost peaceful, but inside her, something else churned. A small voice that whispered, even now, that maybe she had overreacted, that maybe she should have brushed it off like so many passengers before her. After all, she had her seat now. Wasn't that enough? No, it was not. She knew what she had seen in Emily Carter's eyes, the hesitation, the suspicion. It was not about policy or random checks. It was about perceived worthiness. That hesitation had not existed for the white businessman behind her. The process had flowed smoothly for him, like water down a familiar path. But for Naomi, it was a dam, a checkpoint, a test, and this wasn't her first. Naomi had been working for the FAA's Office of Civil Rights for almost 5 years. Before that, she had spent 3 years in the Department of Transportation, compiling passenger complaint patterns and writing internal policy memos that no one seemed eager to read. Her face had been in countless staff meetings. Her reports passed across tables where no one made eye contact with her. Yet she had stayed. She stayed for people who could not file complaints, people who didn't know how to articulate the discomfort of being quietly dismissed or subtly denied. She stayed because the patterns were too consistent to ignore. Today's flight was not her first undercover mission. It was, however, the first one in a long while where the sting had felt so personal. Perhaps it was Emily Carter's tone, polite but clipped. Or perhaps it was Naomi's own exhaustion. The burden of constantly blending in, being quiet, composed, agreeable. It weighed heavier than the suitcase in the bin above her head. A flight attendant passed by, offering a warm smile. "Good morning. Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" Naomi glanced up. The woman's name tag read Sophia. She was younger than Naomi expected, maybe late 20s, with soft curls pinned behind her ears. Her smile appeared genuine, not forced. "Water, please." Naomi answered with a small smile. Sophia nodded. "Still or sparkling?" "Still is fine, thank you." As Sophia walked away, Naomi jotted down a quick note. Initial interaction with cabin crew professional and polite. No evident bias. Name tag Sophia Martinez. Every note mattered. It wasn't just about collecting evidence of harm. It was also about recognizing when staff did their jobs well. Too often. The same communities blamed for systemic failings were also the ones doing the hard work to protect passengers. Naomi refused to paint with a broad brush. She had seen too many good people pushed to the margins because of the failures of a few. She took a sip of water when Sophia returned and thanked her again. Passengers continued boarding. Naomi noticed a man with a heavy watch and a sharp blue suit glance at her seat as he entered. His eyes flicked from the number above her to her face, then quickly away. He settled into 2C. She made note of it. The pilot's voice crackled through the speakers shortly after. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, James Hawkins. We're just wrapping up final checks and we'll be pushing back from the gate shortly. Please take your seats and fasten your seat belts. Flight time to San Francisco will be approximately 6 hours and 10 minutes. Thank you for flying with us." Naomi listened, then glanced at the front of the cabin. The lead flight attendant had begun doing a walkthrough. Her name tag read Linda Chen. Her expression was serious, efficient. She barely looked at the passengers as she passed. Naomi leaned back slightly. The engine's hum began to grow louder beneath her feet. As the plane prepared to taxi, her thoughts wandered to a conversation she had last night with Marcus Lee, her colleague stationed in another section of the flight. He was sitting in economy, 2 rows from the back, posing as an everyday traveler. Their mission was to observe separately, compare notes later, and build a case only if patterns emerged across multiple points of contact. Stay alert, but subtle. Marcus had told her, let them think you're just another frequent flyer. If they mess up, don't flinch. Let them dig the hole deeper. She smiled slightly at the memory. She admired Marcus's clarity, his ability to remain detached. She wished she could do the same. As the wheels of the aircraft began to roll, a slight tremor moved through the cabin. Naomi felt it in her legs, in her chest. She closed her eyes for a moment and centered herself. No more self-doubt, no more second-guessing. This was what she was meant to do: expose the quiet wrongs, hold the gatekeepers accountable, and maybe, just maybe, carve a safer path for the next woman walking toward seat 2A. The plane eased into motion, pulling away from the gate with a subtle lurch. Outside the window, the airport blurred into shapes and colors as the jet turned onto the taxiway. Inside, Naomi kept her hands folded in her lap, every muscle deliberately relaxed. She had trained herself to appear unfazed, but beneath the calm surface, her mind was busy cataloging. Seat 2A, Miami to San Francisco, American Flight 243, boarding resistance noted, gate agent's name Emily Carter. Everything she experienced became data, every moment stored not just in memory, but in the precise format that she would later enter into a federal case log. She had learned early on that cases weren't built on outrage. They were built on patterns. She adjusted the seatbelt, clicking it into place just as the plane began to accelerate. The vibration underfoot intensified. Within seconds, they were aloft. The lift-off pushed her back into the seat as the ground below fell away. For a moment, everything was weightless, calm, suspended. Then came the silence that so often followed. Naomi stared at the seat back in front of her. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. A soft chime announced they had reached cruising altitude. She heard the rustle of newspapers, the clink of glassware from the galley, the unmistakable creak of leather as passengers settled deeper into their seats. Everything felt ordinary, which is why the interruption struck like a sudden ripple in a still lake. Sophia Martinez reappeared in the aisle with the beverage cart. Her demeanor remained warm as she offered drinks to each of the first-class passengers. When she reached Naomi, her voice carried a cheerful tone. "Would you like a drink, Ms. Reed?" Naomi offered her name softly. "Of course. What can I get you? Tea would be nice. No sugar. Coming right up." Sophia moved down the aisle, offering the same courtesy to each passenger. Naomi made a note. So far, Sophia's behavior had been respectful and even-handed, but that was only one point of contact. She looked across the aisle at the man in 2C. He was now reading a business journal, fingers absently stroking the edge of the page. When Sophia reached him, Naomi watched their exchange. It was friendly, casual. The man cracked a joke. Sophia laughed. It was subtle, but Naomi felt it. A slightly longer pause, a slightly warmer tone. She was used to it. When Sophia returned with her tea, Naomi accepted it with a nod and murmured thanks. The flight attendant smiled again, then turned to continue service. Naomi took a sip and stared ahead. She didn't fault Sophia. Micro-behaviors like this were rarely conscious, but when added up, they painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. A few minutes later, Linda Chen entered the cabin from the front. She moved with military efficiency, a small tablet tucked under one arm. She conferred briefly with Sophia near the galley, their voices low but not inaudible. Naomi wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but she caught snippets. "That's her?" the senior attendant asked. Sophia nodded. "In 2A. Did you check the manifest? It matches. First class confirmed. But the gate agent flagged it as a possible error." Naomi's heart didn't race. Her expression didn't change, but a sharp awareness moved through her body like a wire tightening. She wasn't supposed to be listening, but they hadn't tried to conceal their words. And now that she had heard them, she couldn't unhear them. Possible error, flagged. Flagged by whom and why? She reached for her tablet and typed without looking. "Flight attendant conversation, 12:04 p.m. Flag noted on passenger 2A, no justification heard." She set the device down and stared at her tea, now cooling in its cup. The pattern was emerging. Naomi leaned back, her head resting against the leather. Her eyes closed for a moment. In that moment, she was 10 years old again, standing in line at a movie theater with her aunt. The clerk had asked for an ID, even though children were not required to present one for a PG movie. Her aunt had smiled tightly and asked if that was now policy. The clerk had stammered. Then a family behind them, white and wearing matching baseball caps, walked right in without being asked for anything. Her aunt had said nothing else, but Naomi remembered how tightly she held her purse the rest of the afternoon. She had spent a lifetime watching those small moments pass by unnoticed, but today she would not be invisible. A subtle shift in the cabin interrupted her thoughts. Linda Chen had returned and was now speaking quietly to the man in 2C. Naomi watched as his brows knit together in mild confusion, then nodded. He glanced over at her briefly. She met his gaze, but he looked away just as quickly. Then Linda walked toward her. "Ms. Reed," she said with a polite tone. "May I have a quick word?" "Certainly." Linda knelt slightly, bringing her voice closer to Naomi's ear. "It seems there may have been a mix-up at the gate. We're just double-checking some seat assignments. There's a possibility we may need to relocate you temporarily. I appreciate your understanding." Naomi blinked. "I'm sorry. Can you clarify I have a confirmed first-class ticket for this seat?" "Yes, of course, and everything appears to be in order. We're just working through a system notice that came from the ground. One of our agents indicated there was a potential error. We're verifying now." Naomi nodded slowly, her voice calm. "And who flagged the error?" Linda hesitated. "I believe it was the gate agent at boarding, Emily Carter." Naomi stated it plainly. Linda didn't reply. "I'd prefer not to be moved unless there's a safety concern," Naomi said. "Of course. Let me check with the captain." Linda walked away, tapping her tablet. Naomi's jaw tightened. It was happening again. Not an outright accusation, not a blatant removal, just enough confusion, just enough suggestion to plant the seed that perhaps she didn't belong. She turned to her tablet and opened the notes again. Verbal communication, Linda Chen, cited flag from gate, no explanation provided. As she typed, she became aware of the shifting glances from other passengers. A woman across the aisle was pretending not to listen, but her eyes kept flicking toward Naomi's seat. The man in 2C adjusted his tie, then opened his laptop. Naomi sat straight. She would not shrink. If they tried to move her, she would request documentation. If they insisted, she would comply quietly, but every word would be written, every action noted, and when the time came, she would present the pattern, a pattern of quiet denial, a choreography of suspicion, a script that played out on too many flights, against too many passengers who had done nothing but show up with the wrong skin in the right seat. The seatbelt sign chimed again. The plane shook lightly from turbulence. Naomi remained still, her hands flat against her thighs. She wasn't just observing now. She was waiting. The hum of the aircraft persisted, steady and low beneath the floor. First class had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Passengers flipped through magazines or adjusted their reclining seats. One woman to Naomi's right had already requested a blanket and tucked herself in with the ease of someone used to being pampered at 35,000 feet. Naomi, by contrast, remained upright. She had noticed Linda Chen returning to the galley twice, whispering to Sophia each time. Both women glanced toward her seat when they thought she wasn't looking. The glances weren't malicious, but they weren't casual either. They were calculated. They were planning something. She had seen this before. A flicker of movement in the front cabin caught her attention. Linda had emerged once again, this time accompanied by a man in uniform. The epaulets on his shirt gave him away. It was Captain James Hawkins, a tall, lean man in his late 50s with sharp cheekbones and a crisp gait. His face was unreadable, but his presence shifted the cabin's atmosphere. Whispers traveled up the aisle like ripples across a still lake. Naomi felt her spine lengthen as the captain and lead flight attendant approached. "Ms. Reed," Captain Hawkins said with the kind of professional courtesy reserved for passengers who might soon cause a scene. "May we speak with you for a moment?" "Certainly," Naomi replied. Her voice was calm, though she knew exactly what this was. The three of them stepped into the narrow space just beyond the first-class curtain, in the small galley between sections. It was barely large enough for all of them to stand without brushing shoulders. The curtain closed behind them with a faint swish. The captain cleared his throat. "There appears to be a complication regarding your seating assignment. Our system indicates that seat 2A was double booked. Unfortunately, Another premium passenger has a paid confirmation for this seat as well." Naomi tilted her head. "I was not informed of this at the gate. My boarding pass, ID, and payment are all valid." "I understand," the captain said, "and I want to assure you that we're investigating how this happened. However, to minimize disruption to the rest of the cabin, we'd like to ask you to relocate temporarily until we resolve the issue." Sophia added, "We have a seat available in Economy Plus. You'll still receive premium service, and we can offer a travel voucher as compensation for the inconvenience." Naomi's eyes met hers directly. "So, I'm being asked to leave my confirmed seat mid-flight for a so-called double booking that wasn't mentioned at the gate. With no documentation provided, Linda spoke next. We're following procedure, ma'am. We don't make these calls lightly." "May I see that procedure in writing?" Naomi asked, still soft in tone. The flight crew hesitated. Naomi held their gaze. Captain Hawkins shifted slightly. "I'm afraid we can't delay cabin service much longer. If you choose not to comply, we may have to involve ground management once we land. So, you're saying I can either move now or be removed from the flight later?" There was a beat of silence. Then Linda gave a shallow nod. "That is the situation. Yes." Naomi looked down for a moment. She felt the weight of this decision, not just for herself, but for what it represented. This wasn't about inconvenience. It wasn't about a seat. It was about assumptions. About gate agents who looked at her and saw a mistake. About a system that saw her presence in first class as a question rather than a fact. She inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly. "Very well," she said. "I'll comply. But I expect the name of the passenger replacing me, the gate agent who flagged my reservation, and a written report filed on my behalf." "Of course," Linda said, her voice brittle. "We'll note it internally." Naomi gave her a look that made it clear she didn't believe a word of it. They returned to the first-class cabin together. It was quiet now. Too quiet. Every head was turned toward Naomi as she gathered her things. She could feel the weight of 100 silent judgments. She was not about to give them the satisfaction of watching her break. She stood tall, reached up for her carry-on, and slid it from the overhead bin with smooth precision. Sophia stepped forward as if to help, but Naomi gently waved her off. She needed no assistance. The man, standing near the front, clearly the one waiting for her seat, shifted impatiently as she stepped aside. He wore a designer blazer and a look of mild annoyance. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't need to. Naomi paused as she passed him. "Excuse me, did you also book 2A?" He glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Yes, paid extra for it this morning. Did they explain why they asked me to move?" "No, just said there was a seating error." Naomi nodded once, then continued walking. As she made her way down the aisle, the sound of her footsteps felt louder than it should have. A passenger in row 4 leaned sideways to watch her go. 2 teenage girls in row 7 whispered behind their hands. Naomi kept her head high. She found her new seat in row 18 Economy Plus. Technically, but a far cry from first class. The seat was narrower, the legroom minimal. The man beside her was already asleep, snoring lightly against the window. She tucked her bag under the seat and sat down slowly. She didn't look back. Instead, she pulled out her tablet and resumed typing. Flight 243. Seat reassignment, mid-flight. Stated reason, double booking. Passenger replacing me, unidentified white male, approximate age 40s, premium ticket purchased at gate. No compensation offered beyond vague promise of voucher. No documentation presented. She paused and stared at the blinking cursor. Her chest tightened. In moments like these, it was easy to doubt yourself, to wonder if maybe you were overreacting. If maybe, just maybe, it really had been a mistake. But deep down, Naomi knew. This wasn't the first time. And if something didn't change, it wouldn't be the last. Row 18 was quieter than Naomi expected. The hum of the engines pressed gently against her ears, and the overhead lights had been dimmed for the cruise portion of the flight. Across the aisle, a man in a gray hoodie scrolled through his phone while chewing gum with disinterest. A teenage boy 2 rows up leaned his seat back aggressively and blasted music through earbuds loud enough to be faintly audible. Naomi sat perfectly still. She hadn't even fastened her seatbelt yet. Her tray table was up, her hands folded gently in her lap. A blank page glowed faintly on her tablet screen, the blinking cursor waiting patiently for her to tell the truth. But she couldn't move. It wasn't just about the seat. That part she could accept. People were reassigned all the time. Delays happened. System glitches occurred. She had documented enough legitimate errors in her time as an FAA auditor to recognize that not every mishap was malicious. But what cut through her like a thin blade was the indifference, the quiet assumption, the ease with which she had been pushed aside. She had seen it before. She remembered a flight 2 years ago, headed from Denver to D.C. The passenger was an older black man, mid-60s, traveling with his daughter. They had purchased 2 first-class seats, but the airline had overbooked. Only 1 seat remained. A flight attendant had leaned in and whispered to the daughter, "You can take the one in economy. It's not a big deal. He'll be more comfortable up here alone anyway." It wasn't a big deal. That was the phrase they always used. But it was a big deal. It was always a big deal when someone quietly told you that your presence in a premium space was negotiable, that your comfort, your experience, your right to belong could be traded for convenience. Naomi adjusted her posture and tapped on her tablet. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a beat before she began typing. Emotional impact elevated, downgrade compounded by visibility of replacement passenger, lack of explanation, and absence of apology. Subject experienced judgment from other passengers and crew, no procedural documentation offered, flight continues without redress. She paused. Was she being too clinical? She sighed softly and deleted subject, replaced it with a, "That's better, honest, real." She glanced to her right. The woman in the aisle seat had now pulled out a novel and seemed engrossed in it. Naomi considered starting a conversation, but her energy wasn't there. Instead, she looked out the window. The sky outside was vast and indifferent. Clouds stretched like frozen waves, soft and white beneath the plane's path. Somewhere down there, cities hummed with movement, people with lives completely unaffected by what had just happened to her. She wasn't angry. Not yet. But something inside her had cracked. She thought of her mother, of how she used to tell Naomi to always walk into a room like she belonged there, not arrogantly, just firmly, unapologetically. Don't ever give them a reason to think they're doing you a favor by letting you exist. Her mother once said, standing in the kitchen with a spatula in one hand and a tea towel in the other. You're not taking up space. You're holding it. Naomi smiled faintly at the memory. That woman had endured 1,000 indignities with her head held high. She had worked as a high school principal in a district where no one expected black girls to excel. and she made sure they did. She had fought for students who didn't know how to speak up for themselves, and sometimes even for ones who didn't want to be fought for. Naomi had inherited her mother's stillness, that quiet refusal to be shaken. A soft chime signaled the start of beverage service in economy. Naomi tucked her tablet into the seatback pocket and reached for a bottle of water from her bag. She took a slow sip, then leaned back. The flight attendants rolled their carts down the aisle, and she watched them move. It was hard not to notice how their tone shifted from row to row. Some passengers received warm greetings, light jokes. Others, like the black woman across from her in row 20, got flat expressions and clipped words. "Excuse me," the woman said softly, her hand raised politely. "Could I have a blanket if there's one available?" The flight attendant nodded without making eye contact. "I've been really cold since we took off. I'll see if we have any left." She moved on. The woman glanced at Naomi, and for a brief second, their eyes met. It wasn't a look of shared outrage. It was weariness, recognition. Naomi reached for her tablet again, documented that exchange. She wanted to believe it was just coincidence, just a crew member having a long day, but deep down, she knew better. Disparity in attentiveness, pattern of passive neglect. She began to outline the case. Flight number, timeline, interactions. She noted names again, approximated facial expressions, contextualized every word. She added memory fragments, the kind that later gave texture to an otherwise dry report. She knew this case would be strong. It wouldn't just be about her seat. It would be about the culture that allowed decisions like these to happen unchecked. It would be about passengers like Mrs. Johnson, who later in this flight would become a turning point. But Naomi didn't know that part yet. Not fully. For now, she was just a downgraded passenger with a sharp eye and a quiet storm gathering inside her chest. At that moment, the man next to her stirred and shifted. Without opening his eyes, he grunted and leaned toward her, muttering, "You're in the wrong row. This is middle, not the aisle." Naomi turned to look at him. Her voice was even, but cool. "No, this is my assigned seat." He squinted. "Oh, sorry." He adjusted back to his original position. She didn't reply. She reached for her water again and drank deeply, grounding herself in something tangible. The coolness, the weight of the bottle, the firmness of her breath. Marcus would be documenting from his seat in row 32. He had likely witnessed her removal. He wouldn't ask questions until after the flight. That was their agreement. Maintain roles, observe first, debrief later. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She simply breathed. And in that breath, she recommitted. Not just to this flight, but to the hundreds of flights that came before it, and the thousands that would come after. This wasn't just about what had been taken from her. It was about what she was building. A record, a truth, a reckoning. Naomi shifted in her narrow seat, trying to adjust for the discomfort. Her legs, which had comfortably extended in first class, were now pressed inward, thighs brushing against the armrest in the seat beside her. She tugged at the edge of her pantsuit jacket, smoothing out the creases that were beginning to form along her lap. Her tray table rattled slightly whenever the plane hit a mild patch of turbulence. It was not the seat that bothered her most. It was the atmosphere. Down here, the air felt different. The courtesy had thinned. Flight attendants moved more briskly, rarely stopping to make eye contact. Conversations were shorter, smiles were rare, Everything felt like a transaction. Efficient, yes, but not warm. She watched Sophia Martinez step into the aisle a few rows ahead. Sophia had been gracious in first class, warm even, but here she looked rushed, preoccupied. Perhaps the contrast was only Naomi's imagination, perhaps not. A man in row 21 asked for ginger ale. Sophia poured it quickly, didn't say a word, and moved on, 2 rows behind him. A woman with a service dog requested hot tea. The flight attendant nodded without comment. The cup arrived 5 minutes later. No stirrer, no napkin. The woman looked confused but said nothing. Naomi jotted it all down. The differences weren't always stark. They were subtle, smaller courtesies skipped, tones flattened, patience shortened, but when viewed as a pattern, they mattered. They created a different experience, one that didn't feel as human. She opened a folder on her tablet labeled Observed Service Disparities. She tapped in new entries, 12:43 p.m. Ginger ale served without verbal acknowledgement. 12:47 p.m. Hot tea delivered without accessories or check-in. Overall tone rushed, impersonal primary recipient profiles, passengers of color, elderly, disabled. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she added a final note. Cabin climate impersonal, task-driven. She closed the file, sat back, and let her eyes wander. Across the aisle, the same black woman who had asked for a blanket earlier was now hugging herself, trying to stay warm. She had taken off her shoes and curled her feet beneath her, clearly trying to conserve body heat. Still no blanket. Naomi had been watching. She knew the woman had asked twice, both times. The attendant had said she would check. Neither time had she returned. Naomi unbuckled her belt and stood slowly. She walked 2 rows toward the rear galley, weaving gently between knees and armrests. One of the junior attendants was reorganizing plastic meal trays. "Excuse me," Naomi said softly. The attendant looked up, startled. "I'm sorry to bother you. There's a passenger in row 20 who's been asking for a blanket for quite a while. She's clearly cold. Could someone check if there's one available?" The attendant blinked, then offered a mechanical smile. "Sure, I'll look." Naomi nodded and returned to her seat. 10 minutes passed. No one returned. The woman remained curled up, arms wrapped tightly across her chest. Naomi didn't stand again. She didn't say anything. She only typed. Second blanket request ignored. No follow-up provided. Passenger in visible discomfort. She felt the weight of each sentence. Each line wasn't just a report. It was a person's experience, flattened into documentation. The seatbelt sign flickered on again. Another minor wave of turbulence rocked the cabin. The plane dipped slightly before stabilizing. Some passengers gasped. Others reached for armrests. Naomi remained still. She noticed that during turbulence, attendants in first class would go seat to seat, checking passengers, offering calm words and assistance. Down here, they disappeared, buckled themselves into jump seats, waited it out. When the movement stopped, no one checked on the woman who had asked for the blanket. Naomi opened her notes again. Post-turbulence welfare check absent. No passenger monitoring observed in economy rear cabin. She leaned back and took another sip of water. Her bottle was almost empty, and no one had offered refills. In first class, someone would have noticed by now. She shook her head gently. This wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about pampering. It was about respect. The flight continued. A mother 2 seats ahead was trying to calm her fussy toddler. The child was whining. legs kicking against the tray table. A man across the aisle sighed loudly and muttered something under his breath. The mother flushed, clearly embarrassed, bouncing the child lightly on her lap. Naomi watched as the woman tried to wave down a flight attendant. "Excuse me, do you happen to have another pair of kid headphones? Ours just stopped working." The flight attendant, a tall woman with a name tag Naomi hadn't yet captured, leaned in and frowned. "We've only got one per child. If it broke, I'm afraid that's it." It wasn't rude exactly, but it lacked empathy. The woman apologized quietly and sat back down, cradling the headphones in her palm like a broken promise. Naomi recorded it. Lack of alternative for child passenger, dismissive tone, no solution offered. She paused, then added, "Mother appeared mortified. No attempt made to de-escalate." This is what people meant when they said they felt unseen. It wasn't always about being shouted at or denied boarding. Sometimes it was just about being ignored, about having your needs weighed as less urgent, less real. She glanced at the front of the cabin. Linda Chen had not returned to economy since Naomi was reseated. Sophia had passed through only once. The newer attendants did most of the movement here. None of them had approached Naomi. Maybe they assumed she didn't need anything. Maybe they assumed she shouldn't. She felt the familiar itch of discontent along her ribs, but she pressed it down. She would not let frustration cloud her task. Clarity was her greatest tool. The man in the hoodie next to her yawned loudly and rubbed his eyes. "You fly a lot?" he asked. Naomi blinked. "Excuse me, you seem like someone who flies often. You're real composed." She gave a small smile. "I do, yes. For work." He nodded. "Me? Not so much. Everything down here's kind of cramped." "Huh?" She looked around. The narrow seats, the trays that barely fit a laptop, the crowding near the restrooms. "It is." She agreed. He gave a small chuckle. "First class probably makes you forget how the rest of us live." Naomi's smile froze. "Yes," she said finally. "I suppose it does." She turned back to the window and let her eyes settle on the clouds. The space she once occupied had already forgotten her, but she had not forgotten it, and she would not let the people who ran these planes forget her either. Not this time. The quiet of the cabin shattered with a sudden cry. "Help! Please, she's not breathing." The voice came from somewhere behind Naomi, sharp with panic and rising above the hum of the engines. Heads turned. Seatbacks shifted. A man in his 60s stood halfway up in row 25, his face pale, trembling hand hovering over the woman beside him. "She's not breathing. Someone, help her." Naomi's pulse spiked. She dropped her tablet into the seat pocket and stood. Around her, passengers froze in place. Most simply looked around, unsure of what to do next. Others leaned away, wary of getting involved. Only a few unbuckled. Flight attendants appeared within seconds. One came sprinting from the front of economy. Another emerged from the rear galley, eyes wide. "What's the issue, sir?" "It's my wife. She just passed out. She's not breathing right." Her eyes rolled back. Naomi stepped out into the aisle, gently brushing past passengers as she moved toward the scene. She stopped just short of row 25 and watched. The woman, a black woman, maybe mid-60s, was slumped in her seat, her head tilted to one side, lips slightly parted. Her skin had gone ashen around the edges, and her hands rested limply on her lap. "Do we have a medical professional on board?" the junior flight attendant called out. Silence. Passengers looked around again. A few craned their necks but said nothing. Do we have a doctor, nurse, paramedic, anyone with emergency medical experience? Still nothing. Naomi inhaled, then raised her hand. I'm not a physician, but I've completed advanced FAA medical training, and I've administered CPR in flight before. I can assist until a licensed medical professional is identified. The flight attendant blinked. What Naomi stepped forward without waiting. I'm certified. I work for the Federal Aviation Administration. Give me gloves and access to the emergency kit. Now. Something in her tone pushed hesitation aside. The attendant reached into the compartment overhead and retrieved the orange emergency medical bag. Naomi pulled on the gloves, crouched beside the woman, and quickly assessed. Shallow pulse, cold skin, breathing irregular, semi-conscious. She tilted the woman's chin slightly upward, opened her airway, and checked again. She's breathing, Naomi said quietly, but she's struggling. Her heart rate is erratic. I need someone to grab the portable oxygen and the blood pressure cuff. We need to elevate her legs slightly. The woman's husband hovered nearby, distraught. Angela. Her name's Angela. 1 minute she was fine. The next she just went pale. She's never done this before. Naomi looked up. Has she eaten today? Any recent changes in medication? She skipped lunch. We were rushing. I think she took her blood pressure meds, but not much else. Naomi nodded. She turned to the flight attendants, now standing at her side. She likely fainted due to a combination of low blood pressure, stress, and possibly low blood sugar. Get orange juice or anything sweet. Also, someone needs to contact the cockpit. This may require emergency ground support upon landing. One of the flight attendants nodded and rushed off. Another stayed, watching anxiously. Naomi turned back to Angela and gently patted her cheek. Ma'am, can you hear me? You're on a flight to San Francisco. You passed out, but you're safe now. Can you open your eyes? Angela's eyelids fluttered. Naomi continued speaking calmly. You're okay. Just stay with me. You're going to be all right. The oxygen canister arrived. Naomi secured the mask gently over Angela's face and adjusted the valve. The woman's breathing began to steady, her chest rising and falling more regularly. Thank you, her husband whispered, his voice cracking. Thank you. Naomi gave a small nod but didn't look away from Angela's face. A few more minutes passed. Slowly, color returned to Angela's cheeks. She blinked again, more alert now. Her fingers twitched. Can someone notify the captain? Naomi said, let him know the passenger is stabilizing but still requires monitoring. We may still need paramedics upon landing. I'll do it, said Sophia, who had now arrived. The other attendant, still lingering, finally spoke. You work for the FAA. Yes, Naomi replied without looking up. I'm a federal auditor, Civil Rights Division, on assignment. The woman's expression changed like puzzle pieces falling suddenly into place. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She stepped back, as if uncertain what to say. Naomi continued tending to Angela until the passenger's hands were steady enough to hold the cup of orange juice brought to her. Her husband sat beside her, whispering softly, You saved her life. She wouldn't have made it without you. Naomi didn't respond. She returned the emergency kit, discarded the gloves, and stood. Her knees ached slightly from kneeling on the hard floor, but she barely noticed. Passengers around her watched in stunned silence. Some nodded, others looked away. Naomi met no one's eyes. She returned to her seat, Her hands trembled slightly now, the adrenaline finally receding. She sat back, exhaled, and pulled out her tablet again. Flight 243, medical emergency. Row 25, black female passenger Angela Johnson, assisted due to absence of medical personnel, coordinated with crew, passenger stabilized after oxygen and glucose administration. Additional note flight crew unfamiliar with FAA-authorized emergency protocol. Hesitated to release medical bag without immediate credential verification. She stopped typing. The irony wasn't lost on her. They didn't question her right to render aid once a life was at stake, but they questioned her right to sit in first class. Her chest ached not from fatigue, but from something deeper, something older. She had just saved a life in a section of the plane where, hours earlier, she was made to feel invisible, and still, no apology, no acknowledgement from Linda, no contact from the captain. It was as if she had merely fulfilled an expected duty. No more. She couldn't let it go this time. She opened her case log and began outlining a new report, this one under a separate heading, Incident Summary, Disparate Service, plus Emergency Response Witness, Naomi Reed, Federal Auditor, Case ID 243 MIA SFO. As her fingers moved, her resolve sharpened. This flight wasn't just a pattern anymore, it was a turning point. The cabin was quiet again, but it was no longer peaceful. Naomi sat in her seat in row 18, her back straight against the cushioning, fingers calmly typing. She could feel it now, the weight of eyes, the subtle awareness that had spread throughout the aircraft like a slow-burning fuse. What began as a medical crisis had become something else entirely. People were talking, not loudly, not openly, but in soft murmurs and glances that lingered a little too long. Somehow, the news had traveled. The woman from row 20, the same one who had asked for a blanket and never received it, had caught Naomi's eye on the way back from the restroom. She paused in the aisle for just a second and mouthed a silent thank you before continuing to her seat. It was small, but it meant everything. Naomi turned back to her screen and added another line, ripple effect observed. Multiple passengers now aware of FAA affiliation. Tone of crew shifting slightly. Sophia Martinez returned to the economy section not long after. Her expression had changed. There was less of the flight attendant mask and more of the woman underneath cautious, perhaps even concerned. She stopped by Naomi's seat, kneeling slightly to meet her eyes. "Ms. Reed, are you comfortable? Can I offer you anything? Water? Coffee?" Naomi paused, then shook her head. "I'm fine. Thank you." Sophia hesitated. "I wanted to say, I didn't know who you were. Not at first." "That's usually how audits work," Naomi replied gently. The younger woman looked down, her voice barely audible now. "I didn't handle things the way I should have earlier. I should have said something when you were asked to move." Naomi didn't reply at first. She let the silence linger. Then she said quietly, "You don't have to apologize to me, but I hope you'll remember how this felt the next time someone in a seat like mine is treated like they don't belong." Sophia nodded. "I will." She stood, offered one last glance, and moved on. Naomi took another breath and resumed her notes. Tone shift acknowledged from Sophia Martinez. Expressed regret, unprompted. But there were still others who hadn't approached her. Linda Chen remained in first class. Captain James Hawkins had not contacted her, and Emily Carter, the gate agent who had flagged her at boarding, was no doubt still working at Miami International, unaware that her name would appear in a federal report by morning. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, letting the silence press against her ears. The hum of the plane was soothing in a way. She used to love this part of the flight somewhere above the clouds, disconnected from the weight of the world. Now, she felt more connected to it than ever. She thought about Angela Johnson, resting now several rows behind her, oxygen mask removed, sipping ginger ale with her husband's hand in hers. She thought about her own mother, riding coach decades ago to visit her dying sister, forced to surrender her seat after being told her ticket was invalid even though it wasn't. She thought about the many unseen passengers who quietly endured. The crew might have believed the incident was over, but for Naomi, it was just beginning. She tapped out another message on her encrypted FAA system. Passengers stabilized. Ground support will be needed upon landing, requesting coordination with San Francisco emergency responders. Recommend crew debrief upon arrival. Potential civil rights flag pending final report. The words were clinical, precise, but behind every keystroke was fire. Another 20 minutes passed before the next visitor came to her seat. Linda Chen. The lead flight attendant appeared composed as always, tablet in hand, smile carefully practiced, but her posture was stiffer than before. Her voice less confident. "Ms. Reed, I just wanted to thank you for your assistance earlier. That was beyond what we expected. Truly." Naomi tilted her head slightly. It was the first time Linda had acknowledged her since removing her from first class. "I was glad to help," Naomi replied, "and I hope Mrs. Johnson continues to stabilize." Linda nodded. "We've spoken to the captain. He'll be coordinating with emergency response teams on the ground. Just wanted to let you know we appreciate what you did." Naomi let a few seconds pass before speaking. "May I ask something?" "Of course. Why was I removed from first class?" "Ms. Chen." Linda hesitated. "There was a flag on the seat assignment from the ground. You know that wasn't a valid reason. My ticket was confirmed, my ID was verified, and there were open seats elsewhere." Linda blinked. The words hung between them. I didn't question it at the time." She admitted. "We were trying to avoid delays, and it seemed like the easiest solution was to move the only black woman in first class." Linda looked down. Naomi's voice remained steady. "I don't expect you to fix what's already happened, but I do expect you to report it, fully, honestly, because what happened to me happens more often than you think, and if it keeps being smoothed over, it never changes." Linda stood silently for a moment. Then she gave a small nod. "Understood." She turned and walked away. Naomi sat back, her breath slow and controlled. Her heart wasn't racing, it was resolved. The flight continued. The lights dimmed for final descent. The captain's voice finally broke through over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've begun our initial descent into San Francisco. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. For those seated near row 25, medical personnel will be meeting the aircraft upon landing. We appreciate your cooperation and thank you for flying with us today." Naomi looked out the window. The clouds began to thin. Beneath them, the outlines of the city emerged: bridges and buildings, tiny streets and distant cars. It all looked small from here, and yet so significant. She thought about how the report she was writing might ripple out into meetings, into policy reviews, into retraining seminars and disciplinary actions. She didn't need applause. She didn't want headlines. She wanted accountability. The plane dropped slightly as it passed through another layer of cloud. A child cried behind her. An overhead bin clicked shut. The cabin lights flickered softly to full brightness. And Naomi Reed, invisible no longer, sat calm in her seat, one hand resting firmly over the tablet in her lap. She was ready. The moment the plane's wheels kissed the tarmac, there was a collective exhale from the passengers. San Francisco shimmered under a veil of early afternoon haze, a silver-gray light pouring through the windows as the aircraft taxied down the runway. The sky was cloudless now, a far cry from the tension-filled clouds inside the cabin. Naomi remained still. Around her, passengers began to shift, collecting belongings, stretching limbs. The usual rustle of descent zippers unzipped, headphones off, bags tugged from under seats echoed softly. But amidst the routine movements, there was something different in the air, a silence that wasn't born of fatigue or boredom. It was awareness. People had seen her step forward when others froze. They had heard murmurs of who she was, had felt the ripple shift when her identity so carefully veiled had begun to surface. In row 25, Angela Johnson remained seated with an oxygen mask loosely resting in her lap. Her husband clutched her hand with quiet devotion, whispering reassurance even as his own eyes glistened with fatigue. Ahead, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at San Francisco International Airport. Please remain seated while medical personnel board to assist a passenger requiring attention. We ask for your patience and cooperation. Thank you again for flying with us." The voice of Captain Hawkins was calm, professional, distant. Naomi noted that he still hadn't acknowledged her directly. She closed her tablet, slid it carefully into her bag, and waited. 2 paramedics boarded moments later, moving quickly down the aisle with a stretcher in tow. They spoke quietly with the Johnsons, then with Sophia Martinez, who had returned to assist. Sophia pointed to Naomi briefly, murmuring something, and one of the medics nodded in acknowledgement. As the team carefully guided Angela onto the stretcher, a few passengers reached out offering comforting words, a touch to the shoulder. Naomi simply watched, her face unreadable. When Angela passed Naomi's row, their eyes met once more. The older woman's lips curved into the smallest smile. Naomi returned it with a gentle nod. She waited for the paramedics to exit before standing. Her legs were stiff, but her mind was sharp. She stepped into the aisle and slowly gathered her things. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, thanking passengers for their cooperation, but there was none of the usual cheerful chatter. Linda Chen stood near the front galley, her back straight, eyes scanning but not stopping. Sophia lingered near the curtain, watching Naomi approach. "Thank you again," Sophia said softly. "For everything." Naomi paused. "You don't need to thank me. You just need to remember what happened here." "I will," Sophia replied, her voice tight with something deeper than guilt. Maybe grief, the kind that comes when someone realizes they were part of something they didn't question soon enough. Naomi stepped past her into first class. The seats were mostly empty now, the luxury abandoned. She took in the crisp linen, the silver trays being collected, the silence where there had once been subtle judgment. She stopped near seat 2A, the one she was forced to vacate. The man who had taken her seat was long gone. A water glass sat half-finished on the armrest. She stared at it for a moment, then walked past it without pause. At the cabin door, Linda waited with the captain. "Ms. Reed," Captain Hawkins said. His voice was calm, formal. Thank you for assisting during the emergency. The crew is grateful for your intervention. I've submitted a report to dispatch noting your actions and requesting commendation through appropriate channels. Naomi nodded. I appreciate that. Captain, Linda spoke next. We will be conducting a full internal review of the seat reassignment. I've also notified our operations manager at the gate. They've been asked to connect with you. She said it with forced composure, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty. Naomi raised a brow. Will this internal review include accountability for how the situation was handled? Or is this just another paper trail with no teeth? Linda looked flustered for a second. We're treating it seriously. Good, Naomi replied, because I am too. The captain cleared his throat. If you have any additional concerns, our customer care, I'm not here as a customer. Naomi interrupted quietly. I'm here as a federal auditor, conducting a routine but comprehensive observational review. What happened on this flight will be included in a formal report to the FAA Office of Civil Rights and Service Integrity. Both the captain and Linda fell silent. Naomi offered a final nod and stepped onto the jet bridge. The light was brighter here. The hush of the cabin fell away, replaced by the soft sounds of airport movement, luggage carts humming in the distance, intercoms paging connecting flights, footsteps echoing off tile. As Naomi entered the terminal, a man in a navy blazer with a Southwest Airlines name tag approached. Ms. Reed? Yes, I'm Robert Morales, Terminal Operations Lead. I've been briefed. First, thank you for what you did during the flight. We're coordinating with the Johnson family to ensure they receive proper follow-up care and compensation. And the incident at boarding, Naomi asked. We've already pulled the gate logs. We'll be speaking with Emily Carter directly. The boarding system flagged your reservation as duplicate despite proper verification. That shouldn't have happened. It was human error, but one that shouldn't occur, especially in first class. Naomi's expression remained neutral. Human error is the most common excuse for systemic bias. Mr. Morales, he shifted uncomfortably, will ensure it's addressed. Naomi held out a small card. This contains a reference number tied to my audit report. You'll receive a formal request for documentation and written statements. Please be thorough. Everything you provide will be reviewed by the Civil Rights Office. He took it carefully, nodding, understood. Naomi turned and continued toward baggage claim. Passengers from her flight trickled past her. Some glanced at her with curiosity, others with respect. No one stopped her. She didn't need them to. She had never done this work for attention. She did it for the quiet truths, the small injustices no one else documented, the moments that added up until someone could no longer say it was accidental. As she reached the end of the corridor, her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Saw what happened. Meet you at Carousel 4. I've got notes. Naomi smiled faintly. She replied, on my way. Also, schedule follow-up with Johnson family. And file Emily Carter's full name under inquiry list. Will do. Marcus responded. Naomi slipped her phone into her coat pocket and walked with even steps. This flight had been a crucible, but the investigation was just beginning. Carousel 4 spun slowly, its dull metal surface reflecting the fluorescent lights above. Suitcases slid onto the belt one by one, black, navy, the occasional red or patterned one with vacation stickers from a world far less serious than the one Naomi Reed occupied. She stood to the side, hands folded in front of her, posture still as ever. Her bag hadn't come yet. But she wasn't waiting for it. She was waiting for Marcus. He arrived minutes later, dressed in a tan jacket and pressed navy shirt, rolling his carry-on behind him with casual efficiency. His walk was confident, but not flashy. Just like Naomi, he had learned the art of being present without making noise. He spotted her, offered a quick nod, and joined her without a word. For a few moments, they just stood side by side. Then Marcus spoke quietly. Heard they brought in paramedics. That true, Naomi nodded once. Elderly black woman, collapsed mid-flight. Oxygen helped. Blood sugar, stress, neglect, pick your culprit. You stepped in. No one else did. Marcus's brow furrowed. Captain useless. Didn't make contact until descent. Said the right things, but never acknowledged me personally. What about the crew split? Sophia Martinez showed signs of awareness. Regret. Even Linda Chen mostly managed optics. Everyone else stayed quiet, especially in economy. He sighed. Your seat reassignment confirmed and logged, flagged at the gate. Supposed duplicate reservation despite proper ID. They gave my assigned first-class seat to a white male passenger who had arrived later than me. No apologies, no second questions. Marcus took out his phone and opened a shared file. Flight 243, Miami to San Francisco, Southwest Airlines. Date, time, crew list already populating. He glanced at Naomi. This one's not just about customer service, is it? No. Naomi replied, this one's about the normalization of erasure, about how black passengers, especially women, can be removed from comfort without confrontation. Quietly, cleanly, with a smile, Marcus tapped his screen, capturing the quote. You got it all. I've got what matters. The removal, the tone shift, the medical neglect. But what I really have is the proof of contrast how I was treated before, during, and after they realized who I was. He looked up, and the moment they knew I was federal, everything changed. The tone, the deference, the language. They started remembering how to be careful. She turned toward him now, but the truth is, Marcus, I'm not special. I just had the badge, and that's what makes it worse, because most people don't. Most people get removed from first class or denied assistance or ignored when they ask for a blanket and they don't have a federal system backing them up. They just go home feeling small. Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he said, You're not wrong, and that's why this report has to cut deep. It has to sting. Naomi gave a slow nod. It will. I've already drafted the incident timeline. I documented the medical response, or lack thereof. I noted the passive neglect in economy, the inconsistencies in tone, the refusal to perform welfare checks unless prompted. I even logged the conversation with Robert Morales at the gate. He folded his arms. Anything from passengers. Some. I received visual acknowledgments, a few soft thank yous. But mostly, silence. That's the thing about being the one who names injustice. You start to feel like a mirror nobody wants to look into. Marcus smiled faintly. You always were good at uncomfortable truths. She didn't smile back. Not yet. Do you think this will go anywhere, she asked. The data. Yes. The process, absolutely. The public. Maybe. But change is slow. Accountability is slower. Naomi sighed. Sometimes I wonder if anyone would have listened to Angela Johnson if she hadn't collapsed. If I hadn't stepped in. If I hadn't had the authority. Marcus tilted his head. Sometimes the story needs a crack before the light comes through. At that moment, her suitcase finally rounded the bend on the carousel. She stepped forward, gripped the handle, and pulled it off in one clean motion. "You good to head to the terminal office?" he asked. "Yeah, but first, I need coffee." They exited the baggage area and made their way to a nearby airport cafe. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet. Naomi ordered black coffee. Marcus got chai with oat milk. They took a small table near the window, far from the traffic of travelers shuffling toward gates and the escalators. Naomi opened her laptop, synced her encrypted files, and began reviewing her typed notes aloud. 2:13 p.m. Boarding agent flagged first-class ticket without cause. No systemic issue detected with ticket. Racial profiling suspected. 2:18 p.m. Reassigned without effort to find alternative solutions. 2:42 p.m. Tone change from crew noted after relocation to economy. 3:05 p.m. Blanket request by black female passenger ignored twice. 3:32 p.m. Medical emergency. No doctor on board. Naomi intervenes. 4:05 p.m. Flight crew alters tone upon discovery of federal affiliation. 4:47 p.m. In-person acknowledgement from ground operations supervisor. She paused. There's more. Small things, micro behaviors, body language, priorities. But these are the moments I'll build the case around. Marcus sipped his chai. What's the framing? Not just civil rights. Systemic erosion of trust. A flight is supposed to be a neutral space. You buy a ticket. You get what you paid for. But when treatment changes based on who you are, how you look, then the sky stops being equal. He nodded slowly. And if we ignore it, then the next Angela doesn't get help. The next Naomi doesn't have a badge, and the next report never gets written. Naomi closed her laptop and looked out the window. Outside, another plane lifted off the runway, angling upward into the endless blue. She wondered how many invisible battles were unfolding inside it right now. "You ever think about leaving this job?" Marcus asked quietly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "it's exhausting. Being the one who notices, being the one who speaks, but you stay. Because someone has to. And because every time I almost walk away, something happens to remind me why I can't." Marcus leaned back. This flight reminded me that even when you're calm, composed, credentialed, you're still one seat assignment away from being made invisible. He didn't answer. He just listened. Naomi stood, cradling her coffee. "Let's go file it. The sooner it's documented, the harder it is for them to pretend it didn't happen." They walked back toward the FAA liaison office in the terminal, their footsteps echoing softly in the hall. Behind them, the airport buzzed with life. Flights boarding, luggage rolling, announcements calling out names. But ahead of them, something different stirred. Not noise, movement. The FAA liaison office at San Francisco International wasn't grand. No plush furniture or sprawling glass walls. It was tucked behind a frosted glass door on the mezzanine level of Terminal B, flanked by a quiet hallway few passengers ever noticed. But what it lacked in design, it made up for in authority. Inside, the room buzzed with quiet intensity. A large table dominated the center, surrounded by plain chairs and anchored by a wall-mounted screen already blinking with the Southwest Airlines logo. A folder labeled Flight 243 Audit sat neatly in the middle of the table. Naomi and Marcus entered side by side, their steps steady. A staff assistant greeted them and quickly ushered them to the table. They had been expected. Within minutes, 2 representatives from Southwest Airlines joined them. Cynthia Doyle, the airline's Director of Passenger Experience, and Alan Brewer from Legal Affairs. Their smiles were cordial, their eyes were calculating. "Thank you both for meeting with us on such short notice," Cynthia said, taking her seat. "Of course," Marcus replied, his tone neutral. "It's best these conversations happen while observations are still fresh." Naomi remained quiet, unfolding her laptop and connecting it to the screen. The room dimmed slightly as the monitor lit up with her dashboard of notes, reports, and visual timestamps from Flight 243. "Before we begin," Marcus said, "I want to confirm that this discussion is being logged and that the airline has agreed to submit a formal written response within 7 business days." "We have," Alan said with a nod, "and we've reviewed the passenger manifest, cabin crew reports, and incident logs from the flight in question." Naomi's voice cut in, cool and clear. "Then you're already aware that multiple procedural violations occurred, not just administrative systemic, not just isolated repeated." She clicked to the first slide. It showed her assigned first-class seat and the boarding timestamp beside it. "This is the moment I was flagged. A fully verified black woman, flying under a corporate alias for confidentiality, was removed from first class without cause." The justification duplicate booking was not supported by internal system data. The gate agent bypassed at least 3 cross-checks before escalating. Alan shifted in his chair. "We acknowledge the seat was reassigned improperly. The agent, Emily Carter, has already been placed under internal review pending." Naomi didn't let him finish. It wasn't just about the seat, it was about who was in it. She clicked again. This time, a chart appeared showing passenger demographic data by cabin. First class was 91% white, economy, 64% non-white. The patterns spoke for themselves. I was removed with no alternative offered, no apology given, and no documented escalation path explored. I was placed in economy and promptly forgotten until a medical emergency occurred that your crew was unprepared to handle." Cynthia interjected gently. "We've reviewed the emergency logs. You stabilized the passenger before our crew responded with full protocol. That's commendable, but it's not commendable," Naomi said sharply. "It was necessary, and it shouldn't have been." She let the silence sit for a beat before continuing. "Your flight attendants skipped multiple welfare checks, ignored passenger requests, and failed to initiate basic follow-up after turbulence. Service bias was observable, not aggressive, just constant, passive, dismissive, systematic." Cynthia's face softened slightly. "Was it the entire crew?" "No." Sophia Martinez showed signs of awareness. She adjusted her tone. She approached me after the emergency, expressed regret without prompt. But the leadership on board, including Linda Chen and Captain James Hawkins, never once addressed me directly, even after knowing who I was. Alan leaned forward. "Captain Hawkins logged your role in the medical response. That'll be included in the internal crew commendation file." "Commendation isn't the point," Naomi replied. She clicked again. A new slide appeared, showing timestamps from her call log, photos of Angela Johnson in the cabin, and screenshots of internal notes. Angela Johnson could have died, and had I not been there, she might have. This wasn't a matter of hospitality. This was about dignity, about safety, about the structural default to ignore certain kinds of passengers until something breaks. Cynthia glanced at the screen, then back to Naomi. "What are you recommending?" Naomi exhaled quietly and closed her laptop. Here's what I'm not recommending: a quiet review, a gentle memo, or a retraining slide deck with pastel icons and vague promises. Alan's expression darkened slightly, but Naomi pressed on. What I am recommending is the following. 1. Immediate suspension of Emily Carter, pending review of her full employment record for patterns of discriminatory behavior. 2. Mandatory bias response training for the entire cabin crew of Flight 243, led not by internal HR but by a third-party civil rights organization. 3. Full audit of all first-class seating reassignments over the past 18 months, filtered for race, gender, and resolution method. 4. A direct apology issued to Angela Johnson and her family for the in-flight failure to properly assess and assist her medical needs. 5. A public-facing commitment from Southwest Airlines to examine and publish its equity protocols related to in-flight service, seat assignment, and crew engagement. The room went still. Alan looked like he wanted to argue, but Cynthia held up a hand before he could. These are strong demands. They're not demands, Naomi said. They're opportunities. To stop pretending this isn't happening, Marcus added quietly. These aren't just numbers in a file. They're experiences passengers live through every day. You fix it now, or you deal with it later in court, or worse in the press. Alan frowned. Are you threatening litigation? Naomi leaned forward. I'm stating facts. If this report reaches the public without meaningful action, you'll be forced to respond on someone else's timeline, and I promise you, it won't be as graceful. Cynthia sighed, rubbing her forehead. Give us 48 hours. Let us review internally. We'll issue a provisional statement and schedule a formal response session with your office. Naomi stood. 48 hours. No more. Cynthia rose as well. Her voice softened again. Ms. Reed, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You shouldn't have had to go through any of this. Naomi looked her in the eyes. But I did, and others do, every day. She turned and walked toward the door, Marcus following behind her. Once in the hallway, Naomi allowed herself to breathe. That felt heavy, Marcus said beside her. It always does, Naomi replied. But if it doesn't, we're not doing it right. They walked silently toward the elevator, their reflections gliding along the polished corridor walls. So, what happens next? Marcus asked. Naomi pressed the button and waited. We go write the final report. We make it undeniable. And then I fly again. She looked at him with the faintest glimmer of a smile. Because they don't get to own the skies. 3 weeks later. Naomi Reed sat in a quiet coffee shop near Union Station in Washington. D.C. Rain traced delicate patterns across the tall windows, soft and rhythmic. Like a lullaby, the city hummed to itself. The buzz of conversation was low, the espresso machine hissing in short bursts, the hum of laptops and phones blending into white noise. But Naomi's table was still. Her black coffee had gone lukewarm. Her laptop screen glowed with the final report, now complete, time-stamped, and submitted. Her name sat at the top of the digital document. Not an alias this time. No shield of anonymity. Just Naomi Reed, Federal Aviation Administration, Civil Rights Division. The conclusion was short. The undersigned confirms that Flight 243 represents a pattern consistent with disproportionate bias in both passenger treatment and crew engagement. The in-flight emergency response exposed systemic failures in wellness protocols and implicit devaluation of certain passengers based on race, Immediate action is not only recommended, it is essential." She leaned back. A part of her wanted to feel satisfaction, validation, the weight of a job well done, but that wasn't what this work gave you. Not really. This work gave you clarity, consequences, change, if you were lucky, and sometimes it gave you silence. Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out a folded letter. It had arrived 2 days ago, sent by regular post. No return address, just careful cursive handwriting on a cream envelope. Inside was a card. "Dear Ms. Reed, you may not remember me, but I will never forget you. I was the woman you helped on that plane. My name is Angela Johnson. My husband and I wanted you to know that I recovered well, and I'm home now. The doctors said it was a combination of blood pressure medication, lack of food, and stress. They also said I was lucky, but I know it wasn't luck. It was you. I also wanted to say this: no one should have to carry what you carried alone. Not the judgment, not the silence, not the need to prove you belonged, but you carried it anyway. And in doing so, you reminded me that dignity doesn't wait for permission. Thank you for helping me breathe again." Angela Naomi folded the card slowly, carefully, as if it were made of glass. She tucked it back into the envelope and placed it into her journal. Moments later, Marcus arrived. He was carrying 2 coffees and a USB drive. "Hot this time," he said, sliding a cup across the table. Naomi smiled. Small mercies. He sat, tapping the drive against the tabletop. "Here it is. The preliminary findings from Southwest. Want the good news or the bad news? Let's try good." Cynthia Doyle issued a public apology to the Johnson family. The airline launched an internal audit on first-class reassignments across 3 major hubs. Emily Carter has been officially terminated, and 2 of the crew members on Flight 243 are undergoing mandatory retraining. They've also announced a partnership with the National Center for Equity in Aviation. Naomi raised her eyebrows. "That's more than I expected." "Same here." "And the bad news? Captain Hawkins retired early. No admission of wrongdoing. Just a quiet exit." Naomi nodded slowly. It was always going to be like that for some of them. Quiet doors, no accountability, just distance. Marcus offered a shrug. "Still, the paper trail exists. It's permanent now." Naomi took a sip of her coffee. "And the passengers. Some wrote in. We got 5 official testimonials, all anonymous. One came from a mother who watched her teenage daughter in economy being brushed off while asking for water. Another was from a man in first class who said he hadn't realized how badly Naomi was treated until he saw Angela collapse. Naomi didn't speak. She just listened. "I think," Marcus continued, "some people finally saw the sky from a different angle." Naomi tapped her fingers on the side of her cup. "Do you think that's enough for now? Maybe. But long term. We keep flying, keep auditing, keep showing up in spaces where people think we don't belong." Naomi looked out the window. A plane soared low above the rooftops, preparing to land at Reagan National. Its wings cut clean through the gray sky. She remembered something her mother used to say back when Naomi was a child flying coach to see relatives in Atlanta. Her mother had never been a frequent flyer, but she had known the weight of being watched, the quiet humiliation of being treated as less. "Every seat has a story," her mother would whisper. "That's why we sit tall." Naomi sat tall now, and not just because she had to. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Naomi opened her inbox. Dozens of messages, FAA briefs, training documents, a new assignment pending, but one email caught her eye. Subject A, seat for you. It was from Southwest Airlines. A formal invitation. Dear Ms. Reed, as part of our commitment to transparency and progress, we invite you to join our newly formed Passenger Equity Council. This board will help shape future policy on customer experience, crew training, and anti-discrimination protocols. We believe your voice is not only necessary, it is overdue. Warm regards. Cynthia Doyle, Director of Passenger Experience. Naomi stared at the screen. Then, slowly, she smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, this time the seat wouldn't have to be fought for. It would be offered, earned, protected. She hit reply. I accept. 2 days later, Naomi boarded another flight. It was a smaller aircraft this time, a commuter jet, a short route to Chicago, where she would meet with attorneys regarding another equity review. But something had changed. As she stepped into the jetway, the flight attendant looked up. Good afternoon, Ms. Reed. We've been expecting you. The tone wasn't forced. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. Naomi took her seat, not in first class this time, but not because she was removed, because she chose it. The man beside her offered a smile and a polite nod. Naomi smiled back. She didn't need the announcement. She didn't need the recognition. She had something better, the knowledge that every quiet moment, every report filed, every confrontation endured, it mattered. And in the quiet hum of the plane lifting off, Naomi felt the skies remember her, not with thunder, but with clarity, with justice, and with room for more. When Naomi Reed stepped onto that plane, she didn't wear a badge, demand attention, or raise her voice. She simply observed and remembered. What began as a stolen seat became something much bigger, a mirror to how quietly discrimination hides in everyday moments, in ignored requests, in the way some passengers are asked to move, while others are never questioned. But Naomi didn't just witness it. She changed it, through courage without spectacle and strength without rage. She reminded the world that accountability starts not with loud gestures, but with unwavering truth. And when the skies forget who belongs, someone must remind them. Angela Johnson survived that flight, not just because Naomi was trained, but because she cared. And in the end, it wasn't the title Naomi carried that shifted policy. It was the dignity she refused to surrender. This story is for every person who's ever been told, silently or aloud, you don't belong here, and it's a call to all of us to listen, to speak up, and to make room, because the sky's wide and justice deserves altitude. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to support more powerful, real stories like this one. We have more voices to lift, more truths to tell, and more flights that deserve a second look. Until next time, keep your seat upright, your mind open, and your heart strong.